Wheaton College banned movies for 72 years after they were invented, until they began to allow them in 1967. Just 40 years later, they put a large screen projector into chapel. What was once a mistrusted medium of communication, images, and especially moving, talking images, suddenly became a requirement for worship. So while it's a nice thing to not have to squint to see the speaker when you're sitting in the audience, and while the song lyrics on screen are much more legible than the old overhead projector system, it does also bring up the question of what kind of challenge this poses to religious practice. As Neil Postman put it, in the second commandment, the one forbidding images, it's a strange injunction to include as part of an ethical system unless its author assumed a connection between the forms of human communication and the quality of a culture. I'm told that students in the balcony especially appreciate the video screen because it helps them pay attention, helps them because they can see the facial movements of the speaker. And this may indeed be a social good, but if chapel is a place of worship, one question we might ask is whether it helps us to hear God. Listening requires the practice of listening, just as music requires the practice of music. Video screens may condition us to be willing to listen only if we can tolerate looking, which is an effect that has already completely transformed the music industry and is why all your pop stars are so hot and can't sing very well, whereas the old pop stars weren't very good looking but could sing beautifully. Listening to the word does not have the same effect as looking at the word. The word speaker implies speech. The word audience has the same root as the word audio and auditorium and implies listeners. God communicates via his word and through the living word spoken by the mouth and received by the ear. God is not visible, yet when he does speak, action results. Something happens. The world comes into being. The incarnate God, the Word made flesh in Jesus Christ, was visible to his followers, but is no longer visible to us. When he spoke, the old world was made new again. Jesus may even suggest that hearing was above seeing when he says to doubting Thomas in John 20:29, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." We live now in an age that says a picture never lies and that seeing is believing. This is the opposite of faith. This is proof. Faith, you recall, is the evidence of things not seen. And that means they are things that are heard. You remember that God speaks in that still small voice. But the Old Testament's meteorological descriptions may not work for you because weather no longer makes an impression on us when it has its own TV channel. It merely entertains us. So if I may, let's consider that while God works in mysterious ways and does speak through the tongues of men and women, he has never, so far in recorded history, spoken directly through an electronic medium. People throughout history have heard God's voice, and sometimes they have heard it audibly, but they have never, to my knowledge, received an email from God, a text, or an apparition of his visage on their television. God does not post to YouTube. If he did, 1 Kings 19:11 through 12 would read much differently. The Lord God said, "Go out and stand in a Wi-Fi hotspot in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Then a great and powerful electronic media revolution tore down all previous pre-electronic media forms and shattered their business models. But the Lord was not in the media revolution. After the internet, there was the cell phone, but the Lord was not in the cell phone. After the cell phone came the BlackBerry, but the Lord was not in the BlackBerry. And after the BlackBerry's battery died and the recharger was lost, there came a gentle whisper, and the whisper said, "Can you hear me now?" Telepathy is a word coined in 1882, the same year that Edison electrified Lower Manhattan, and the same year that Nietzsche claimed that God had died. And yet telepathy, the idea of knowing the mind of someone who is absent, is relevant to knowing the mind of God. And here is the great challenge and opportunity for you, young Christians, as you go out into the world, as we enter into a greater digital disincarnation and distraction. Christians will be very well suited to addressing the real needs, neuroses, and mental disorders of the future if they can learn to practice what they preach: presence, speech, and action. Those are the three conditions of attendance and forms of transmission under which Christ and his followers perform their miracles. under which St. Paul preached, and under which the saints operated throughout history. You have to be there. You have to speak in as unmediated a manner as possible, and you have to do the work of the gospel. This is, I believe, God's great calling for us to embrace. You can send a friend an email when a loved one dies. You can send a check to a foreign country that's been hit by a tsunami. You can Twitter about your moral concern over the loss of morality in media. All these things are good, but we are called to perfection, to love. And love has one synonym only: sacrifice. Primarily, our call is to sacrifice the efficiency, convenience, and distance that our technology affords us, and to show up in person and feed the hungry, clothe the poor, comfort the orphans and widows in their distress, and not be corrupted by the care of our iPhones. Real presence is a prerequisite for real love. But Christians won't be able to do this if they too have been corrupted by the media of this world. We won't be able to offer much help if our primary problems are the same as the over-mediated world's primary problems, which are the problems caused by media. We cannot offer what we do not have. But such were some of you, and if Christ saves us from this, then there is great hope, because then you can embrace your thorn in the flesh as a gift from the paradoxical God whose strength is manifest in weakness, and to the world your struggle will be your credibility. Your weakness will be the strength they need. So be of good cheer, for in the world you will be over-mediated and overwhelmed, but Christ has overcome the world.